Cool. So I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I won't steal the thunder of these panelists. I'll have them kind of introduce themselves and maybe say a little bit about how you found yourself at the intersection of Web3 and music.
Sure. Is this working? Yes. Hi, my name is Cherie. I'm the founder of Water and Music, which is a music tech newsletter, and recently also turning into a research DAO focused on analyzing music and tech trends. In terms of how I got into music and Web3, I've been covering the ecosystem since 2015, back when obviously the landscape and what people were interested in was very, very different. My background is as a freelance journalist and writer. But in the last year, I've been in the process of transitioning Water and Music into becoming a much more collaborative research operation. We have dozens of contributors at this point contributing to our research on music, Web3, and a lot of other emerging tech trends in the industry. So I'm coming to this conversation both from like the more critical standpoint, having covered music and Web3, and also now building out a DAO, hopefully to help people in the music industry understand this technology better as well.
Hi, my name is Alex Salibian, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Nvak Collective. I'm also a record producer and songwriter. Nvak Collective is an impact-driven record label and artist advocacy collective that is fully embracing Web3 to reshape the operating system of the music industry. So we're looking at under the hood, how music is financed, how it's monetized, and how that can change how artists create, and therefore change how fans can experience music. So I'm approaching this from the perspective of a creator. I spent 10 years making records in LA, have made pop records, have gone up the charts, have gone down the charts, and have dealt with a series of very good situations and bad situations in the music industry. So took those frustrations along with my co-founder and decided to build something to approach this from that perspective and to use the tools available to us now and the community available to us now to help make a better creative process and artist development process, also a better artist launch process. So we're looking at what happens when an artist is trying to break through in the current system, when the market is hyper saturated. There are 22 million songs a year being released on Spotify. How do you start to create revenue at an early stage? And how do we take a new infrastructure and simplify that process and speed it up and allow for a middle class to start to emerge in the music industry?
Cool. And we're also going to have Lin from OneOf join us at some point too. I'd love to hear you elaborate maybe. I mean, obviously you've been in the music industry longer than you've been in Web3. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about that transition and like whether or not it was bumpy at first or people didn't get it or kind of how did you find yourself in this position?
Yeah, it took a lot of listening. We fortunately had a series of investors and advisors when we did start just as a Web2 record label, an independent record label. So the biggest piece of advice we got was just to listen, join Twitter Spaces, join Discords, buy NFTs, join collections that you feel that you connect with, start to engage with them, see how they do their marketing campaign. And read constantly. So we spent about 6 months just doing that and not saying anything until we felt like we could communicate. But then at that point, we realized that everyone is learning together. So it isn't, there isn't this someone that knows everything about what's going on, especially between music and Web3. It's still so early. So it was overwhelming. It felt like you're taking in a fire hose of information every day. And when I needed a break and took a couple days not reading, I was already behind. And it's overwhelming. However, as you start to join communities like this and talk to people and you realize we're all in the same boat and we're just trying to create a better world for creators and to experience art in a different way, anxiety went down a bit. And we started to focus on more tangible goals on figuring out, okay, what are we going to do? What do we know about? And how can we fix that? Because there's so many other great people, especially I've learned a lot through Water and Music, and of course what Lin is doing as well, everyone's tackling different issues. And the hyper-collaborative nature was the thing that really excited me. It's the same thing we look for when you're writing a song. Most people don't know it's a bunch of songwriters and producers. So started finding parallels and just got to work.
Cherie, maybe you could take this one. I'm curious about the relationship between like crypto as this new paradigm that's shaking up the music industry, but also like majors are still here, right? And like the existing infrastructure is still here. Is there a world where crypto eats the existing infrastructure? How do they get along, at least in the near term?
Great question. I think it's still like a wait and see kind of situation. From my vantage point, definitely this year seems to be the year that not just in music, but I think across all industries, like major brands are actually like investing in Web3 long term as a like business strategy. They're not just doing like experimental drops. They're like hiring Web3 people internally. So there definitely is a shift happening of at least in that direction, even if Web3 people aren't going to be like necessarily accepting of these bigger players there, try to learn more about the technology. From what I see now, there's something that we're trying to cut through at Water Music. There's so many drops happening, and so many artists, musicians like dropping one-off NFTs, and then the fan or collector gets the NFT, and then it's like, all right, what do I do now? Like, what can I actually do with it? Does this just, especially thinking about like expanding beyond just the very niche group of like very crypto native, Web3 native collectors, like thinking about the so what and like the long-term community experience, and like how can you build that experience in a way that actually takes advantage of the tech behind Web3? That I think is a very important question to ask, and major labels, or just people, not just in major labels, indie labels, like people who, some of the smartest marketers I know work in the music industry because they're working with artists all the time on building out these worlds, building out these like stories long term that I guess like thrive across different platforms. And so I think I am seeing a lot of music Web3 startups or more Web3 native artists partner with people who have built up that marketing expertise already for their Web3 native strategies. And there, I think it could be much more of a partnership as opposed to like, yeah, crypto will destroy record labels. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this kind of like, even within sort of the more crypto native music biz, infrastructure, there's not a lot of agreement about like what even is a music NFT, right? Like, let alone where to start. So you can imagine people get very lost. Maybe Lin, you could take this one. When a new musician is sort of entering this space, what advice are you going to give them? Where are you going to point them to first if they say, I have a fan base and I want to get into crypto?
Yeah, so we're we primarily are the NFT partners for major artists and as well as some of the labels, right? So we're the NFT partner for the Grammys and Warner Music Group and all of that. And we directly work with artists, both big and small. So we have a program for independent artists called Cosign that we kind of work with, provide both financial and technical support to onboard them into Web3. It's very difficult, right? It's very difficult both for the end user, for somebody like my mom to like figure out MetaMask and try to buy NFT, but it's even astronomically more difficult for a musician who's really an artist, try to learn all the technical pieces and try to learn the Web3 marketing nuances. That's very different from Web2 marketing, and very different from just making an Instagram post, right? So we really work with them to educate them on kind of community curation and all of that, but also we also we do a lot of white glove services to take away the complexity, right? If you don't know how to mint your NFT, we will help you mint your NFT. But end of the day, it's really about starting to shift the dynamic where teaching them that, like artists in general, that this is a method where you no longer have to decide if you should collateralize your future record earnings or your future songwriter earnings or your future tour earnings for a label deal, a publishing deal, or a promoter tour deal you have a fourth option, which is kind of really engage your audience community, really build a kind of using NFT to build a membership type of program to start building a long-term kind of relationship with your community. So.
What do you think has to shift there in terms of accessibility, both for people who aren't familiar with the space, like you're alluding to that, you have to kind of walk people through it, like white glove. What do you think has to shift, though, where we can get to a place where more people are going to be able to use these kind of tools?
I think the biggest problem, and maybe it's the easy to solve problem, is the interface problem, right? So what we do is we present an interface where it's not pure Web3 onboarding. It's a hybrid onboarding. You can kind of connect your wallet if you know how to do that. But for actually 80+% of our users, they sign up with just a phone number and an email. They purchase their first NFT within the first session, right? Usually around 2 and whatever minutes with a credit card. So that onboarding step of owning your first piece of digital asset does not require any crypto Web3 knowledge at all. Once you have that asset, then we start teaching you, the community start teaching you how to, there's a one-button export. You can, once you create your wallet, you can actually export your NFT into your own self-custody, but you can do that at your own pace. So the same tool we built for easy user onboarding, we're trying to build for artist creator onboarding too. A music artist should be able to mint an NFT as easy as they can upload something to YouTube, right? So right now that doesn't really exist. It's a 2-week crash course on how to, for an artist to mint on, if you never touched MetaMask wallet before, from that point to the point where you're comfortable minting on OpenSea. And then you get surprised that oh my God, it's going to cost me $200 per NFT to mint in gas fees, right? So,
I'd love to hear from maybe all of you on this one, or anyone who wants to jump in. A lot of people probably at this conference take it as a given, right, that Web3 is shaking up the music industry in some way. But there's also a lot of scams and a lot of skepticism. And I'm curious what you guys would say to people who remain skeptical about this idea that the intersection of music and Web3, maybe it's here now, maybe it's gone tomorrow. So in what ways do you think it's shaking things up?
So the reason I believe it's going to stay is because it has the ability to change real problems that are systemic in the music industry. So if you're looking at the record label deal structure and what I was mentioning earlier about a hyper-saturated market and an ability to own your fans in a way and actually provide them value and utility, which I think many people agree utility is missing from music NFTs right now, but there are a few companies that are starting to change that. So we're going to enter a space once some of these things are figured out, and what Lin was mentioning, also fiat on-ramps and more accessibility, lower the barriers to entry, where there's a real benefit to the artist. And because there's a real benefit to the artist, there's going to be a benefit to their fans, where they can create a different type of art, a different type of experience. They can receive revenue and net profits from that within a couple months or a couple weeks or a couple hours, as opposed to 9 to 12 months or 12 to 18 months, which is how they receive their streaming royalties. And it also allows for them to partner with companies, whether it's new record labels or different platforms, and receive support on marketing, artist development, A&R, artist care, which is something that is a big part, what I think should be a big part of this moving forward, and not be stuck in a debt-based relationship where they're getting an advance, they have to pay it back with interest, and then, also they signed away 85% of ownership. So because of the new monetization models and new experience models, artists can take complete control over this and find brand new ways to interact with fans, and ultimately fans are going to respond to that. I just think we're at the precipice of some of those models being public so we can start to experience it.
I guess two things. One, obviously biased running like a media company covering this world. Skepticism is great. I actually think we need more of it in music and Web3, to be honest, and like skepticism and criticism, that is just what helps make any industry improve, because it makes us like really ask critically, like why do we actually need to use Web3 for XYZ use case? Because in the vast majority of cases, it does just it adds a layer of complexity on top of an already super complicated industry, especially if you're thinking about copyright, about like deals and contracts and the way that they work. So just wanted to like say that like skepticism is good, and I would actually encourage it. In terms of, I think for the question of why Web3 and why it is especially relevant for artists, I think there's been a lot of criticism in the industry over the last several years of the dominance of these very Web2 social platforms. Again, not unique to music, but I feel like it's felt especially strongly of these platforms, essentially musicians having to like pay to rent audiences from these bigger platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Spotify. I think I saw a news article saying that they're soon going to start like charging artists for some of their like on-platform marketing services. So very much is the Facebook model in this like Web2 world. And if you think about Facebook or Twitter, once those platforms go down, they own all of that data, and so you lose that relationship and that connection. And if you think about what an NFT triggers or starts, regardless of whatever like IP is attached to it, it creates that relationship now between the buyer and the seller that can travel across multiple different front-end platforms, and you don't have a risk of like losing that relationship or the history or record of that relationship if, say, some like front-end platform that's built on top of it goes down. So starting to think and to like wrap your head around that, you really do have to think like very, very long-term, like not just about how much money can I make off of this auction tomorrow. It's like, how can I fundamentally rethink my approach to community design and fan engagement and fan interaction now that I have this relationship that can travel with me, as opposed to having to depend on one of these bigger platforms.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like that direct relationship is really interesting to me too. Web 2, in the music business, like part of the issue is predatory big platforms, like you're saying, or platforms that have data monopolies, things like that. But of course, Web3 is a burgeoning industry, and there are big companies cropping up there too, right, all the time. And so what can we do kind of as conscious consumers / investors / artists to make sure that we're not replicating the same inequities that already exist?
I'd be curious to hear both of your thoughts on that too. I mean, so from a research perspective, what actually has been great about Web3, and the tools are not as accessible yet, but on like the Ethereum, or no, choose your blockchain. There is a clear public record of how capital flows for any like NFT transaction that happens, any token sale that happens. And so as an accountability mechanism, I think it has already been super effective. I don't know if people have been following, I think the US government recently arrested someone who was involved with insider trading on one of the biggest NFT platforms, OpenSea. So I don't think that would have been possible to catch in such a quick amount of time if we didn't have that like on-chain record of activity. And it was just people in the community doing that investigative work.
Yeah,
so
there was a Twitter guy who found that out, really.
Yeah, someone on Twitter just had a thread about it, and that triggered this whole investigation. So I think just taking that accountability seriously from like a media perspective, I would love to see a tool or just some educational resources to learn how to read like Etherscan for people who are not familiar with it, just as an example, and just give people the tools to like keep these artists and these companies accountable. Just thinking in this context of making sure we're not just replicating like Web2 inequalities, giving people the tools to be able to like track that over time, I think is very important.
Yeah, I agree. I'll keep mine short. It's rights management and royalty accounting on chain that is going to provide so much transparency that will be valuable not just to investors and artists, but also fans to know, like, hey, I paid for this NFT, I enjoyed this experience, I have this community. This percentage of that NFT has gone to the photographer that made it, or the videographer that put the music video together, or the songwriter that spent weeks with the artist digging deep and figuring out what the narrative is. It's going to take time in order to create a visualization model that is consumable and easily digestible for that stuff, but I think it's just starting small, doing it with one song. could take a couple months to get right, and trial and error. But once it's done, then you can make it more efficient. You can optimize and then start to scale. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing in the next couple months.
So yeah, I mean, clearly, NFT is like clearly going to change the music industry, right? So I never seen a technology in music that was adopted by artists, labels, publishers, all at the same time, like so fast, right? Like how many deals has Universal announced in the last like 3 months? Like the industry is embracing the technology, right? And you know, we did a deal with the Grammys, which was like a 3-year deal. So it's not like the industry is not looking at this as it's a fad. It's a 2021, 2022 fad. I think we're just really early. The reason this is going to be successful is it actually solves a fundamental problem that all sides want to solve. The music business today is a venture model. The labels have to write $5 million checks to 10 different artists way long ago before any of these artists break. They're taking on a massive amount of risk. 9 of those artists are not going to make it. So on the last artist, they have to make it. The label have to take 85% of economics just to kind of justify that venture model, right? So they actually don't really love to do that. Like, if you actually tell the label, just do your marketing piece really effectively, and somebody else is going to give a interest-free loan to all your artists, right? And you take a much smaller, more fair percentage. And I had this conversation at the most senior level, and there is a willingness to consider that, right? Because if they don't have to expose hundreds of millions of dollars of capital funding at risk, the business model is completely different. They don't have to be as predatory. So I think it's, I think the future of NFTs and blockchain for music is not really about completely replacing one of the 3 players. It's about a much more fair distribution and much more power to the artist and much more income to the artist, right? So.
And as you say, it's sort of a meme in the space, but it is early, I mean, relatively speaking. And would be curious to get your guys' thoughts about sort of where you see this stuff going. I think I was doing a panel yesterday, and one of the panelists was saying, if we had NFTs in the 80s, imagine where we'd be now, right? So curious to get your guys' thoughts.
It is so funny that you say that, because a lot of the biggest music NFT launches have been from LimeWire and Napster. I don't know if people have seen this. The OG music piracy platforms are now relaunching as, the brands at least, are relaunching as NFT marketplaces. So there definitely is some historical cycle that's repeating. We're kind of leaning into that that behavior, that culture of collecting music, which is super fascinating. In terms of where I see things going, at least from Water Music's standpoint, I'm also personally more interested in more community-driven models around music and Web3. So there have been a lot of really interesting music DAOs that have launched, a lot of which are actually trying to cross the Web2 to Web3 bridge, which is this whole entire challenge, not just from onboarding, but in terms of data and how you handle that, and merge Web2 and Web3 CRMs. That's another huge issue at Water Music. We're dealing with that in real time right now as well with our token. But so Colors is an example of great YouTube music curation channel, in case people don't already know. They've been around for several years, and they just launched a DAO tied to their community. And I think we're going to see a lot more Web2 historical music brands move into Web3, and they will need all the help they can get to just manage that in terms of not just infrastructure, but community design. Community, no matter how much you put on the blockchain, community management is the most manual, but also most important work you can do in this context. So helping to build out teams around that. So I think we're going to see, especially not just community-driven models, but historical music or lifestyle brands. Pool Suite is another example going through that right now. Making the Web3 transition, whether through NFTs or through social tokens or kind of DAO infrastructure, and kind of tooling emerging to serve those needs.
I think what will start to happen is a lot of the jargon will disappear. We're going to be interacting in these spaces in virtual worlds with artists that they've created for their fans and do NFT tickets, and everything's going to be on chain, but nobody's going to be saying those words. It's going to become quite fluid, and it's going to allow for different tiers and different models to exist in one space, and a new generation of creators to come out and make a living and communicate with their fans. The interesting thing, though, is if you ask an artist what their goal is, most of the time they're going to want to play for a stadium, and they're going to want to do an international tour. It isn't necessarily to, have their like 10 fans that are supporting them or 100 fans that are supporting them. A lot of artists have that bigger dream. So what I'm curious about is how this direct-to-fan engagement model that is going to give rise to a safer and more equitable artist development process, how that's going to merge into the scaling that is prevalent now and allowing fans to be able to sell out an international tour playing for 6,000 to 20,000 cap rooms every single night, and how pop stars are going to adopt it, and then how a musician from an emerging market who had no exposure before is going to find a brand new community and start pulling in revenue and consolidating them and giving performances and funneling that back into their community and building more artists. So it's going to be fast. There's going to be a large spread of different models emerging.
Yeah, I think about there's like probably 3 phases. In the very short term, what's really achievable for every music artist, the low-hanging fruit is kind of a membership token or NFT, right? So like we have a one-of pass. If you have the one-of pass, you can basically get access to Doja Cat's drop and Biggie Smalls drop and all of that. And then you can basically get tickets to Doja Cat's like concert VIP experiences. So it's basically artists have full control of their experiences and their relationship with the fans without having to go into music rights. And though that every artist can have the idea of like, how do I do a super fan club that is NFT gated? Everybody can design that, right? So I think the second step is actually weirdly the royalty piece versus the actual music, right? The royalty rights and the income stream from your art can actually be tokenized, and it just like, some of the early examples is not exactly SEC compliant. I think we're very close to kind of a place where in the short to medium term there is a path to issue SEC compliant fractional ownership of actually your favorite songs or your favorite artist songs. And then longer term, right? So the issue is basically the 3 labels and top 5 publishers now own 70% of all commercial music ever released up to this point. The future artists, the independent artists today, or the artists rolling off their contract today can make a choice to like, in the future, we want to create our music and release them directly to our fans. But it's gonna take 10, 20 years to basically build up enough of a repertoire of new hit songs that is completely Web3 native, released to fans first, versus at the same time there is a whole treasure trove of assets that could be released as NFTs that involves music, but takes a very complicated clearing process that basically artists, labels, publishers, everybody have to agree. So that's a little more of a longer term.
Can I add something very quickly, just building off what both of you were saying? Definitely a trend that I'm noticing in the short term, and I feel like there are 2 like competing philosophies, but a lot of the newer NFT platforms that are coming up that are working with bigger artists have removed the word NFT entirely from their sites, pretty much, except for like a very small, like a short question at the end of their FAQ. So Royal is an example of one of these bigger companies doing like royalty-driven NFT sales. They actually don't have the word NFT at all, unless you like scroll all the way to the bottom of the page. Medallion is another newer startup. They work with Sigur Rós, and they're working with a bunch of like bigger pop and rock artists on building like membership communities. The word NFT is not until the end of their FAQ, and like in the whole onboarding flow, they use the word token or like a collectible, but not NFT. So there's an interesting argument in there that to scale this technology and to onboard fans specifically to it, the technology has to hide, or not hide, but you have to lead with the why, like with the so what, like what's the magical experience that we're going to get that makes this complexity worth it. So yeah, just wanted to highlight those examples.
Well, that's perfect timing because we're out of time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.